Alright, let's talk a little bit about how you play hybrid poke and its different elements and how they're supposed to work together. So, there's a lot of team comps in Overwatch. Dive. Slow setup, but fast engage with a purpose. You should be forcing ults, cooldowns, and looking for fast kills. It's a very crucial comp that almost everyone knows how to play. Poke. It's an entirely different comp. This is the steadiest, the most stable long fight team comp. Make the longest fight and win with sustain. So you're not trying to force anything, you're letting your poke or your poke DPS win it out for you. Brawl. Up close and personal. This is about taking space away from the enemy and applying pressure. And all of you have played GOATs at a certain time, so this should be pretty self-explanatory. So, we have these three team comps that we just talked about. We're going to present them here. We first have a 4-2 comp, which is basically the same as Dive with how you play it. You have a certain core that you move, and then you have two people who are flanking. We have GOATs. All of you have played GOATs. GOATs, you want to be in their face, you want to be as close and personal as possible. You put the Discord orb on the right person, and then all of you speed in and close out the fight. Poke. Poke is a little bit more complicated, but is played out in basically the same way, and how I interpret it is a double bubble. Or double shield, I mean. Double shield with 2 poke DPS, a Mercy to increase the damage that's coming in, and a Zen to deal his own damage, and increase the damage that's already being dealt. So, what kind of strengths or plans do each of these team comps have? Let's start with 4-2 comp. They want to split up the enemy, or split up and sandwich the enemy. You want to have 4 people standing as a core, move, wanting to brawl the enemy team. Then when you actually initiate the brawl, the 2 people, the Tracer and the Ball, flank around and create an uneven fight, because they have to choose between focusing the core, in which case they're gonna lose, or they focus the Ball and Tracer, in which the core is gonna kill them. So Ball and Tracer takes a flank, and it's the Ball and Tracer in this 4-2 team comp that enable the comp. It's what makes it work. Right? So now we move on to GOATs. And how else can you summarize GOATs but you want to run at the enemy team? You want to get to them as fast as possible, but not any comp can just run. That's why Ghost requires a special character, which is Brig, who provides a lot of sustain. So Brig provides the sustain. But where does the damage come from? The damage comes from the Zarya and the Zen, who together deal a ridiculous amount of damage. So the Zen and Zarya provide the damage. But how do you actually get to the enemy team? You have the sustain, you have the damage for it, but you can't close the distance. That's where the Lucio comes in. Lucio speed boosts your team and allows you to close the distance. These 3 people, not necessarily together, but individually, make the comp work. Brig provides the sustain that allows you to live long enough to close the distance. Zen and Zarya win the fight when you do close the distance, and Lucio makes sure you actually close the distance. Okay, but how does all of this work against a poke, for instance, or how does a poke comp work? Well, you want to win the longer fight, or you want to force the longer fight because that's the fights you win. You allow your snipers to get as much time as possible, because you have a lot of sustain. You have the barriers which are really hard to poke through, and Echo and Hanzo can take a lot of off angles really quickly. And with the really bulky frontline, it's really hard to kill them. So you have the poke DPS, plus the Zen pokes or gets picks to create an advantage. So an advantage is created through the poke DPS plus the Zen, which is more or less also a poke DPS. And it's the 2 poke DPS plus the Zen that enable the comp. It's what makes the comp work like it's supposed to. So, we have all of this. This is all fine and good. All of these comps have their own strengths. They all have their own weaknesses. But what characters is it actually that make sure that the comp works? And without those characters, it wouldn't work at all. So, In a 4-2 team comp, if you don't have the ball tracer, it's simply not gonna work. In GOATs, if you don't have the Lucio, you're not gonna close the distance. If you don't have the Brig, you're not gonna sustain. If you don't have the Zen and Zarya, you do not have the damage. And then poke. If you do not have the actual poke DPS and the Zen who provide the damage, then the comp is not gonna find value over time. That's where hybrid comes in. We take all these individual components. In this case, we're not mixing ball, as it says, and poke. We're mixing all three of these team comps into one central team comp that can take advantage out of all of this. So, a combination of all of these would be something like this. So you take the most powerful thing from 4-2, being the ball and tracer, put it into our team comp below. You have the poke, where you have the Zen, and you have, let's say, just one poke DPS that we're going to take to start with. Let's just take the Echo, because she's really mobile. And now you take the Zarya and the Brig to add on top of that. And now you have basically a core that consists of Zarya, Zen, and Brig. You have two really mobile DPS, and you have a really mobile tank. The ball and the tracer provide the 4-2 win condition. The Zen and Echo provides the poke win condition, while Zarya and Brig provides the GOAT's win condition, where you have so much sustain and are really tanky. But okay, but does that actually work? Does that actually make sense? Does it actually get the same win condition? Just because you take the best characters from all of these comps, does it actually work like you want it to? So we can just check off the list that we had previously. So this is hybrid poke. Split up and sandwich the enemy team. You can do that. With the Zarya, Zen, and Brig holding somewhere, the enemy team is going to try to push them. And when they try to get pushed, this ball and the tracer is going to flank around and create the sandwich. And the Echo can either stick with the core, provide more there, creating more of a 4-2, or the Echo can come in from the side or behind, provide even more damage. So that works. Ball tracer takes the flank. They still enable the comp to work. So even though you don't have the same backline anymore, you don't have the same 4 in the 4-2, you still have the 2, so it still works. So as a team, you're on an enemy team. Okay, so the GOAT's win condition doesn't really work here. With this team comp, you quite often, or quite literally, want to do the exact opposite of that. You do not want to run on the enemy team at all. So we can just line that out. Okay, next GOAT's win condition. Brig provides the sustain. The Brig provides the sustain. The biggest problem with Zarya and Zen is that they deal so much damage that they get focused a lot. So a Zarya with 100 charge quite often doesn't live for very long because she gets giga focused. And there isn't a lot that the Zarya can do about it. Same thing with Zen. Zen can potentially provide a lot of healing, a lot of damage amplification, and a lot of damage himself. But he cannot live long enough to do so. That's where the Brig comes in and makes sure that that actually happens. No flankers, no dive tanks are gonna be able to get to them and kill them. So that still works. So the Zen and Zarya provide the damage. It still very much works. The Zen and Zarya are still there. They still do a ridiculous amount of damage if they're allowed to. Lucio provides a gap close. So we do not want to close the gap. So because of that, we didn't draft a Lucio. And because we don't have a Lucio, we can't close the distance. So that's off the table. So they enable the comp. So that's Zen and Zarya and the Brig that enable the GOAT's part of the comp to work. Like I said previously, Ball and Tracer make the 4-2 or the 2 element of 4-2 work. They enable that comp to work. But now we have Poke. How does Poke possibly work with this? So you win longer fights through sustain. Yes. Your core in the backline is really hard to kill. While your Ball, your Tracer, and your Echo can die very easily. But if your Ball, your Tracer, or your Echo dies, the fight isn't lost yet. As long as your central core in the backline stays alive, the fight is always winnable. Because if a Zen is always alive, a Zen can always frag out. If the Zarya alive, she's getting stronger by the second. The longer the fight goes on, the more bubbles she can rotate, the more energy she can get. That's still very much true. So the poke DPS plus Zen to get an advantage. Yeah, you still have the Echo who pokes them out. The Echo might not always stick with the core anymore, but still gets about the same value. You still have the Zen who pokes them out and does a lot of damage on a really far distance. And they enable the comp. So all of that still works great. So what is this comp then really good at? Because so far I'm just said, okay, this comp is magical, it works in magical ways. You just pick the best characters in every team comp, you throw them together, it works. But what advantages does this team comp actually have? Well, Ball and Tracer can flank creating sandwiches like we have said before, as our advantage. The Ball, Tracer, Echo and Zen have very high pick potential and have a lot of poke, which can win longer fights. The longer the fight goes on, the higher the chance that one of these people, or the group of Ball and Tracer, Echo separately and Zen separately, can find picks by themselves. And we're not even counting in Zarya, which wins longer fight just through her existence. So Zen's Discord and Zarya's energy, like I mentioned now, do more the longer the fight lasts. So the longer the fight lasts, the more favored they are to actually just frag out. And Brig provides excellent sustain against dive or anyone who wants to poke the backline. So if there's a Tracer that wants to get to the Zen, she's gonna have to get through a Brig. And any Tracer player is gonna know that's a really, really bad idea. But what disadvantages does this team comp have? Well, you can't run at anyone, so we can't brawl at all. If we can't brawl at all, we need to sit in the back and wait for the enemy team to run on us. That's what the team comp relies upon. And since we don't have a lot of mobility, we do not have the Lucio anymore to speed in or speed out. Positioning has to be on point, and we have to know where the enemy is and make sure we punish their rotations. If they're trying to run at the core, it's very important that the Ball, Tracer and Echo actually distract them or slow down their rotation, making it very difficult or uneconomical for them to run on them. Because, okay, we can run at their backline, but if we do so, all of us are going to be half health, and by the time we get there, we're going to lose. Is the idea that you should leave in the enemy's mind. But this comp plays very similar to 4-2, so even though this picture is very blurry, it has about the same win condition, so we don't need to do a lot of meta crafting of how are you supposed to do things. So against another dive, you control angles. The Ball, the Tracer and the Echo, which are the people who roam, for the most part, need to make sure that the enemy team doesn't just hold angles on you. Pharah or a Widow can't just constantly be eyeballing the Zen, waiting for him to peek the corner and then clicking on him. The Tracer and the Ball needs to be on that. Need to make sure that these angles don't happen. Against spam, they usually have some central core and then some people who are trying to take off angles. Kind of the same thing applies. You want to make sure they don't take these angles. You want them to stay grouped as 6, because when they are grouped as 6, they cannot do anything against you. And Ball can very easily make sure that they have to stick together with the Tracer, because they have very high individual pick potential. So they can together find a pick on almost anyone who is alone. Doesn't matter if it's a Orisa with shift, or if it's a little Tracer just running around. And against Brawl, you take a lot of angles, you surround them, you create the so-called sandwich, as we have said. So when they run on you, you should already have poked them out so much that you can just surround them now and kind of pick them apart. Because you win the longer fight. But what we still need to make sure is we do not run at them. They need to run at us. And we only actually take the fight with them when we feel like it's the time to do so. When the Zarya has 100 charge, or when they're half health, or if we have some really ground pound ultimates we're about to use and they're just gonna die. But more on a general level, what is happening with this comp most of the time is that this core sticks together for the most part. These 3 people stick together for the most part no matter what happens. And then what the job of the rest of the 3 people are is to make sure that the core stays alive. Because they are the priority and they need to stay alive. If during a fight Tracer for a mysterious reason just dies, then that's fine. She's away, but as long as the core stays alive, the fight is always winnable because Zen can still find picks at any time. Zarya finds a lot of value over time, and Briggs makes sure that Zarya and Zen stay alive. Even if you drop 2 people, let's say both the DPS die. It can happen. Sometimes it does happen. But as long as these 3 people are alive in the backline, it's still winnable because you still have so much damage output. Because Zarya over time just finds so much value, and the longer the fight lasts, the more damage the Zarya is going to be able to get into the enemy team, the more Zen is going to be able to do right clicks into the enemy backline, and eventually you guys should just win the long fight as long as you don't initiate a full brawl with them. Which is the problem with the team comp. You cannot just straight run at them. You need the enemy team to run at you. Well, okay. We understand the strengths and weaknesses of this comp, but how are you actually supposed to play it? Well, we have 4-2 elements, we have goats elements, and we have poke elements. So how do we make sure all of this works? So, let's say it's worst case scenario. The enemy team is playing a full brawl, which we're signifying with this Reinhardt here. They want to just clobber our 3-man core, which we have set up over here. So, they are gonna take the shortest path towards them. They're gonna try to, well, get to them and brawl them because they will win. Because this is signifying 6 people. So they're gonna try to take a path like this, straight towards them, or a path like this, or something very similar. What we really want to do is to slow them down or discourage them from taking this. So, if they're just going to walk in a straight line, it's very important that the core, these 3 people, rotate away while poking them as they're coming in. So when they're coming in, if we just drop everything and start running away, then they're gonna get this for free. But as they're running in, we do have an Echo who's gonna spam them from the side. So they're gonna take a lot of damage during that rotation. Maybe they'll have to use some resources. Then we have Ball Tracer is also extremely annoying and is gonna cause them pain. When they're coming in, they're not gonna be able to run in a straight line because Ball is gonna roll through them. Ball's gonna slow them down, Ball is gonna pile drive them, you're gonna take a lot of damage. And Tracer's gonna back up the Ball, make sure the Ball doesn't die, and also poke them. So ideally by the time they get to around here, they should already be extremely poked out. And the really good thing about the core is that it has a very good mix of damage, barriers, healing, and a lot of other things. So for the most part, you might look at this team comp and initially think that it doesn't have a lot of healing. And it doesn't. But for the most part, it doesn't require a lot of healing, because the only people who actively need healing is the Ball, because he's constantly pile driving in. But there's usually enough health packs to heal him up, and an armor pack and a harmony orb can heal him up very quickly. And if any of the DPS need any healing, it's basically the same story. So, when they're trying to come in, for the most part, you stand your ground as the 3-man core if you know that your team is gonna stop them or poke them out very heavily. Because even though you're not fully goats, you have very strong kit from what goat still has. You have Brig, which is the most important part, because she has a lot of sustain, a lot of CC, can slow the enemy team down, and heals your team for a lot. You have Zen, who provides a lot of damage, Discord, and basically amplifies any damage that's coming in, so you guys can very quickly pick people off, like in a pick comp. Then you have Zarya, who the longer the fight lasts, the more they struggle with actually closing this distance towards you, the more powerful is the Zarya is going to be. If the Zarya gets to 100 charge, the Zen puts a Discord orb on someone and these people are coming in from behind, then they're going to die, because they're getting surrounded, or as we put it, sandwiched. Okay, but how do you play against other team comps? For the most part, the only comp that this struggles against is a full brawl that can run on the 3-core backline. But against anything else, it should be relatively straightforward. The enemy team has to use a lot of resources to be able to kill the backline, because if a Winston and the Diva dives them, they're not going to be able to kill anything. There's Zarya bubbles that there's Project, there's Brig Bash. Zen is not going to die for the most part unless Zen Giga feeds and stands really far forward. But if the Zen didn't lose half his health just before the dive happened, the Zen is going to be just fine, even if 3 people dive him. Even if Monkey, Diva, and a Tracer dive them, the Zen is going to be just fine. The thing about this comp is that the Zen seems like a really diveable target when in reality he is not. He's constantly backed up by the Zarya and by the Brig, so it's extremely hard to get him locked down. The easiest person to lock down in this comp is probably the Echo, because the Echo doesn't have a lot of health and only has 1 movement ability on a pretty long cooldown. While Tracer and Ball are very slippery, Tracer is very hard to hit, so she's not gonna die very easily. While Ball is very easy to hit, but he has so much sustain that it's more or less never gonna happen. So to be able to kill this core that's stacking here, you need to put a lot of people on them, because this core can deal with people diving them as a 2-person party, as a 3-person party, even as a 4-person party, if they don't succeed it very well. So you need to put a lot of resources here to make it happen. But if you put a lot of resources here onto them, now that's you're trading 3 people, which is your backline here, for 4 people on enemy team. So by default you have an advantage if you don't die, because the 2 people who are standing in the backline, let's say we signify that with Anna, now you have 3 people who can go and clobber those people. And as long as these guys sustain, it's gonna be just fine. Okay, that's all fine and good, but how do you play this comp on attack? Well, on attack it operates on a very similar way to how it operates on defense. You don't want to brawl with the enemy team, you want to play for the longer fight, and you want to win through charging your Zarya, more or less. So how do you make sure this happens? So, the enemy team is gonna have one of 2 team comps. They're either gonna have a team comp that wants to run on you, or they have a team comp that doesn't want to run on you. So let's say they have a team comp that really wants to run on you. Let's signify that with a red Reinhardt. Well, they're just gonna wait around this corner maybe, or hold here. Then as soon as you cross, they're just gonna run on you. Well, we have all this poke through these 3 characters. Or not poke necessarily, but you can take side angles very easily. While you have this main line of damage that's coming in. So if the core, these 3 people, position themselves in such a way that they can't just get ran on all of a sudden, then you can play in such a way that the Ball constantly disrupts them, Tracer constantly pokes at them, causes a lot of problems for them, and Echo also causes a lot of problems for them, dealing a lot of damage. And if they're just waiting for you to come close enough and they're just gonna run at you, they are going to lose eventually. Because they either have to run at you and never get to you, because you have a Brig who can just bash, who can just flail, and you have a Ball who can slow down this brawl. So if they all of a sudden feel like, okay, we can't wait anymore, we need to go, if they go, there should be enough of a buffer in this area for the Ball to slow them down. Okay, but let's say they don't have a team comp that just wants to run at us. What if they have a team comp that also scales over time, that's also good over time? Well, let's signify that with a sigma, for instance. Okay, maybe even a red sigma. That's even better. So, where are they realistically going to position? They're going to position in a place like this, this, or this. So, when they position somewhere like here, then your comp is even easier to play. Because realistically, what you need to do is get into a position and then hold it. There's a lot of really good rotations you can make as the core, which I'm gonna mark as the blue line. You can do this, take control of this room, and then use the angles you get from this room, being this, to lock down a good chunk of the point. And after you take control of that, you can start walking into this room, starting to take control of this area. Once you have control of that area, you can start making this rotation. And if any time the enemy team wants to contest you in any way, you have these 3 people who can just poke them out. And again, if the Sigma, for instance, is going to stop this rotation, or this team comp that finds value over time wants to stop you guys from making this rotation, they might put themselves somewhere like here. Well, we have these 3 people who are going to come behind them and sandwich them. So they are now stuck between 2 people trying to kill them from the front and the back, and that's the exact strength of a 4-2 comp, because it punishes team comps that wants to stack together. But okay, they don't want to stack together then. Okay. They have some kind of team comp where they have a Farah or something, and they have Echo. Well, neither a Farah nor an Echo is going to be able to kill any of these guys for the most part if they position themselves well. Ball doesn't necessarily need to kill everyone on the enemy team. Echo doesn't necessarily need to kill everyone on the enemy team. And neither does the Tracer. Their only job is to make sure these guys are safe and that they don't die. You can trade your own lives for the core's lives. And for the most part, these 3 people have enough sustain that if any group of 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, or sometimes even 4 go on them, they can take that and they can still win because they have a lot of GOATS elements. They do have the Zarya, which can grant them a lot of initial survivability. They do have the Zen, who provides a lot of damage, a little bit of healing, but for the most part can just kite back and deal a bunch of damage. And you have the Brig and Zarya, who are just really good at sustaining in general. If you run into this kind of team comp, you can gain advantages elsewhere. If you can't walk in here towards them because you're just going to lose, it just fits into your team comp because you don't want to brawl with them ever. You want to position yourself in such a way where you get the advantage. And if the core, or not the core, the roamers, more or less, do what they're supposed to do, the enemy team shouldn't be able to get to you. Or they should distract them so you can get into the position that you want. If you are the core on attack, and you make this really long rotation, for instance, then now, okay, maybe not quite, but there we go. Then you now all of a sudden have control of this room. You can use the high ground in that room, you can use the low ground in that room, but now the pokers on the enemy team are gonna have a lot harder time to poke you guys out. Because the core is in a really good position, and now they have to focus on the core, which they cannot kill for the most part, because they need to brawl them to be able to kill them. Because you need to be able to kill as a sniper or as a Farah, a Zen, through a Brig that's constantly healing, a Brig that's constantly shielding and providing armor packs, a Zarya that can bubble herself and tank damage, Zarya that can bubble the squishies. It's simply really hard to kill. But okay, let's say you take first point and now you're in a really sticky situation. So how do you actually transition this lead you get on first point and move it onwards? So on second point Eichenwald, as an instance, most defending teams are gonna try to control the high ground and gonna deny the enemy team from doing the same. So for most part what you can do is, if you are the core, you can quite often make a rotation to this room. And once you're established here, you have this really long sightline on the enemy here. And if they want to run on you or brawl you, then they have to run across this path right here, which is really hard for them to do because you have the ball, you have the echo, you have the tracer who's just gonna kill them and poke them out. Not to speak of the damage that you have yourself. And you might say it's very tedious, it might take a lot of time, but for the most part, the longer the fight lasts, the higher chance you have of winning because you have Zarya, who gets energy over time. You have Zen, who has a higher chance of getting a pick the longer the fight lasts. You have Echo, who also increases the chance that she's gonna find a pick if you let her live for longer. You also have a Tracer, who if you just let her be unleashed in the backline is eventually gonna find a pick. And you keep making these rotations. You try to position your core in a spot where you're not brawling the enemy team, but you're controlling some kind of space. So let's say this. And if they decide to not touch the core, they just want to drop and contest the payload, well, now you just have this high ground for free. And now that you have this high ground for free, your Zen, your Echo can just use this for free now to damage the enemy on the low ground. And eventually you guys will win that out. They can't just stack as a group and just try to sustain through you guys, because you have a ball, you have a tracer. They're gonna be constantly annoying them. But okay, they're not gonna drop on point. They're gonna try to just stand their own ground and stand here. Well, neither this stack or this core, neither their core is gonna win that, because it's pretty neutral. But we have more than that. We have 3 extra people who can now come in behind and generally cause a lot of problems for them. So again, we see the strength of 4-2 come in, where instead of the core being 4 people, it's 3. We still have the 2 being the ball and tracer, which are tag team, then plus an echo. So we have even more damage. So it's more of a goats element. So goats plus the tag team of ball tracer plus an extra echo.